Hey, good morning. So we are up to Lamed Ches Lamed Aleph. Now getting into the heart of Ketz and Bavarkin here. We have another statement from Mar Baravashi. We're about 8 lines from the top. The Amar Mar Baravashi we're doing today, Lamed Ches Lamed Aleph. Zot the Gemara. The Amar Mar Baravashi. The Mar Baravashi said the following: I duvsha the tamri, the honey that comes out of the dates. Mevarchin aluya shahakal mevarit. The honey that comes out of the dates, you make a shahakal out of it. My timer. Why do you make a shahakal out of it and not AIDS? Because the Gemara explains zeya ba'almahu. It's like the sweat. It's like the zeya of the fruit, and that's it. And since that's all that it is, as Rashi notes, zeya ba'alma ve'ene peri. That's not considered the fruit. You have a date, and you have the juice that comes out of the date. Date juice, the date honey, that's not considered to be the fruit. It's not the pre, and therefore doesn't get ha'etz. Says the Gemara, Kiman, who is this going like this idea of Ma'aber of Ashi that Duvsha the Tamri only gets Shahakal? Says the Gemara, Kihai Tana, it's going like this. That mission that we know that Tanan Devash Tamarim V'yayin Tapuchim V'chemet Sipunais V'sharmei Peres Shal Truma Rabbi Lezer Mechayev Kerem V'chemet Rabbi Shua Peter. We have a machlekes Rabbi Lezer and Rabbi Shua in the mission there in Trumas about the following fruit juices. Devash Tamarim that we had over here, Yayin Tapuchim, right, apple juice, Chemet Sipunais, right, which is some sort of a vinegar that comes out of grapes. Rashi says, "V'chemetz yipunis is seifei anov m'shemes bashlan lamis v'aisim hen chemetz." Right, it's these very unripe grapes that they make vinegar out of it. They sell it today in the stores. You can get wine vinegar also. But the key here for our purposes is not just for understanding Ma'aber Rashi, but for understanding halacha in general is v'shar made peris, any other fruit juices. So you have machlokes of Blezer and Rabbi Shua in relation to truma, right? Once if somebody's mile on this truma, he eats it. He makes a mistake. So he, as Rashi notes, somebody makes a mistake and he eats this he drinks this mixture b'shoigeg. So he has to pay back what he was damaged to the hektish, and he has to give back extra. He has to give back a chaimish. But Rabbi Shua says no. Rabbi Shua says you don't have to give back extra. Rabbi Shua pointed the zeya ba'almahu ve'ein shame truma chal alav. There's no shame truma on this. This is not considered the fruit. It's zeya ba'alma. So according to Rabbi Shua, since it doesn't have the shame truma on it, ve'en lecha peri hanitan lemashka el zeisim va'anovim bilvad v'hainu k'mar Rashi. So the only fruit that are made for their juice are grapes and olives. On those you make ha'etz, and on those you would have to pay back a keren and the chaimish according to Rabbi Shua as well. But other made payers, and including dvash tamarim, you don't have to. Why? Because of the fact that it doesn't get the shame truma. Why does it get the shame truma? Because it's not considered a peri. It's zeya ba'alma. It's just like the sweat of this fruit, and since it doesn't get the shame peri, when you are moil in it, when you drank the juice, you don't have to pay back the chaimish. Therefore, Rabbi Ravashi now is the source. The idea that Rabbi Ravashi said that if you drink this stuff, that you don't make a shahak, you don't make a ha'etz, is now perfectly sourced, at least in the opinion of Rabbi Shua, right? Which is how we pass it, not like Rabbi Lezer. In fact, that's why when we drink apple juice or pineapple juice or other made pears, we make a shahakal. We don't make ha'etz. We don't view that as being of the fruit, but rather the zeya ba'al. You would have a question, because there are probably many fruit today that are literally only made for their juice. Right? If you go down to Florida, not this year maybe, but in other years, normal years, right, you have all these fields of oranges. They're not being grown for the fruit. They're only literally being grown for the juice. That's the whole business model. Okay? That's how that. Nevertheless, this is the machlekes and the source for Marabar Avashi. Continues the Gemara. So one of the rabbis asked Rava the following question: Tarima mahu. What is the halacha about tarima? Says Rashi, tarima mahu. Ma mavarchan alav. What do you make a bracha on this tarima? Says Rashi, v'shem tarima kol davar kadosh k'tzas. anything that's a little bit sort of crushed. Ve'enim merusik, it's not fully, but it's like a little bit crushed, a little bit pressed. So one of the rabbis who was standing by Rava, learning by Rava, asked him a question, Tarima ma, what's the halacha on Tarima? What bracha do you make? So I have adapted the Rav Mike Amalei. Rav had no idea what he was talking about. So Yosef Ravina Kamei the Rava. Ravina was sitting in front of Rava. So just to go off on a minor point for the moment, but one that I like to do from time to time. So Ravina is sitting in front of Rava. What does that tell us? That tells us that Ravina learned by Rava, right? And we know, if you remember the Gemara we had back before, the Gemara told us on Tezvav. You remember the one Hasvavam and Aleph, the Gemara said, Amalei Ravina Larava, Chazimai Hartzurma Merabanan Dasan Marava, this great a student that's coming from Israel. And he said, that if you don't have water to wash your hands by davening, you could wipe your hands on a stone or on a piece of wood and things like this. So who was saying that? Ravina was saying that to Rava. Like, look at this great idea that that came from Eretz Yisrael that we're learning out from, and the whole basis of that was because the pasuk said Erchetz v'nikayin kapi. It didn't say being Erchetz b'mayim. We have another Gemara here. There's another Gemara that we had was on Tav Gimel. The Gemara said, "Iboilu ma'u sheyachnis adam mitzvilin beisakise kavua." Right, the Gemara asked the Chav Gimel and Aleph if the whole discussion about coming into the bathroom with your tefillin on, if you have to go to number one. So Ravina was shari, Rav Adam Aramastan was aser. Asi shayul Rava. So they came, they asked Rava the question. Again, the same thing, so you see Ravina and Rava's connections. We had another Gemara here on Lamed Gimel. There's another Gemara there also about Ravina and Rava. The Gemara said, looking for it now. I'm not seeing it here. But the Gemara also said, additionally, that Ravina over there also asked Rav a question. Also, the Gemara later on in Brachot that we didn't get to yet, but later on Tamach Beis, there's another situation about making a shul into a kapandria. There's a whole issue with that, making a shul into a shortcut. So over there also, Ravina asked Rava a question. So you see that Ravina and Rava had a relationship where Ravina was a student, essentially asking Rava. And here you see in this Gemara is the biggest proof. Yosef Ravina Kamei Rava. Ravina is sitting before Rava, meaning Rava is giving a shir, and Ravina is sitting in front of him. Right, so now the student came in and asked the question. What was the question from the student? The student came in and asked, "What is the story with Terima?" Rava doesn't know what he's saying. Rava says he's not sure what he's talking about. So Yosef Ravina came to Rava. Ravina was sitting in front of Rava, so he then responds and says, "Amar le." He responds, "The Shum Shemi Ka'amris." He asked the student, "Are you talking about Shum Shemi? What's Shum Shemi? Sesame. Take away the shin, make it a sin." Right? The Shum Shemi sounds like the Sum Shemi, sounds like sesame, right? So the Shum Shemi Kaya Amris, are you talking about Tarima made out of Shum Shemi? Or the Kurtimi Kaya Amris? Are you talking about Tarima that's made out of the Kurtimi? What's the Kurtimi? You look at Rashi. The Rashi says the Kurtimi is Karkaim, right? It's like saffron. The Jastrow says the Kurtimi is like a safflower, which is, and I checked on the internet, safflower is called full saffron. It looks like saffron, but it's not saffron. This is all way beyond me. But it's some sort of another type of plant that they would use for various different like oils. If you look at Rashi on Sumsumi, Rashi says lahitzi shamna, to take out the oil. Right? We have still today sesame oil, but also on the kurtimi, safflower is supposedly a very common type of oil also. The portzini ka'amers, you're talking about like grape, as Rashi says, ketishas anovim. That they would also take the grape seeds and they would make some sort of a mixture out of this as well. So on all of these situations, Ravina is asking this student who's asking Rava, what's the bracha that you make on Terima? Rashi explained to us that Terima is something that you're crushing, but it's not fully crushed. And the student wanted to know what bracha you make. Rava didn't know what he was talking about. So Ravina says, well, which kind of terima are you talking? You can make a crust mixture out of a lot of things. So which one are you specifically referring to? So yes, Ravina can make the Rav Amal the Shum Shmika Amers or the Kurt Shmika Amers or the Purt Shmika Amers. And Hachi Vahachi ask Rav Ladaite. So when Rav is hearing what Ravina is saying, he's understanding what Ravina is saying, that he's talking about some sort of a mixture that is crushed. So Rava now responds, Amarle Chashilta Vade Ka'amres. You're talking about a mixture that's crushed. Now I know what you're talking about. So this says Rashi, Amarle Rava Chashilta Ka'amres. Miterch Dever Ravina, from the fact that Ravina was asking what kind of this, Shumshami, or the Kurtami, or the Portsani. So Rava realized, says Rashi, Ravina, Haven Rava, Sasha so he understood now the question. You're asking me something about something being crushed. We're not going to explain this over here, but the Gemara uses the word be'e to explain. That's the Aramaic version of beitze. But you can imagine what the context is over there in the Gemara in Chulin about those items in relation to the male animal's anatomy. So in any event, the Gemara continues. So Rava now says, I understand what this student is asking me about, and I remember, says the Gemara, so Ad Hachi Vachi ask Rava Ladaita, Amar Lechashilta Vadakam, she's the things that are crushed, Vadkarta Milsa, Hadam Ravasi. Now I remember something Ravasi's taught. Hi, Tamri Shal Truma, when you have that dates of Truma, Mutter Lasses Men Terima, you're allowed to make Terima out of these dates. But it's also to make beer out of dates of truma. You can make terima out of truma dates, but you cannot make beer out of truma dates. What does it mean? What's the difference? Says Rashi, mutlas and terima she'ena mafsida. Because when you're making the terima, whatever the terima is, it's not destroying the fruit. It's some sort of crushing, but the fruit is still there. You still haven't taken it out away you haven't been moil and truma. So it says Rashi, it's still considered to be in its original stature or standing. So therefore you make a bar per eight. So the question that the student wanted to know, what's the din on Trima? What kind of bracha do you make on it? So now Rav is explaining that he has a recollection from the Ravasi said. Ravasi said that on dates that of Truma that you make Terima out of it, is be permitted. Why? Because it's still considered milsakayim. It's still considered the way they were initially, the way they are initially, and therefore it is not forbidden. But for us, last man sheikh, it will be forbidden to make beer out of dates of truma, and therefore, as to the answer to the question of what bracha do you make on the terima, the halacha is, says Rav, you make ha'etz, because it's still considered the fruit is still b'milsaka. It's still considered the way it was. The Gemara continues. Terima, if you make the terima mixture out of the dates, you still make the eight because it's still considered to be the fruit is there. By time, but it's still considered like it was initially. It's still a date. It's still a date, and therefore it still gets a bari priha eight. All right. Next Gemara. Again, these are practical questions, but we'll have some more lumdus over here. Unfortunately, we don't have so much time to get into it, but we'll hopefully touch a little bit. Says the Gemara, Shasisa. What is the halacha on Shasisa? What is Shasisa? So, and Rashi tells us over here, Michael ha'asim mekamach kolayas. It's a food that's made out of flour of the barley. Shenasiyav shibitana ba'odsha shibolim lachem. You basically take the ripe young barley, which is still wet, still has its juices. You put it straight into the oven, and then you crush it into flour. Rashi and Erev Chavtes tells us you then add honey, and you make a mixture out of it, some sort of a porridge, some sort of a porridge. If you look in the Gilin Hashas, Rekiva brings down that you should look in Malachim, Malachim Aleph Parak Yud Beis. There's nothing there in Malachim Aleph Parak Yud Beis, but if you look in Malachim Parak Yud Dal, you'll see Malachim Aleph Parak Yud Beis is a very sad story about Rechavam losing the kingship because he decided to raise taxes. The whole concept that is foreign to us nowadays. But beside that, it was a bad joke. But beside that, if you look there, Malachim Aleph Parak Yud Dal, you see over there that the reason that Rechavam lost the kingdom is because of the taxes that he raised. And the Jews decided that Why am I listening to this guy? He's not Shlomo Melech. Forget it. We're leaving. So they made their own kingdom, and the 10 tribes that broke away, they followed a new guy. His name was Yerav Menavat. Yerav Menavat, he had potential, but he ended up going off very bad. Maybe he was once good, but he ended up becoming very bad. The story there in Paragidal is that he had a son, Aviam, I think his name was, who was ill. So he says to his wife, "Go to Achia Shiloini and ask him what's going to be the story with my boy. But don't go dressed, in a way that he would know you're the queen. Go incognito." So he does, and he tells his wife, take some presents for the Navi. That's a whole story in Tanakh when people would bring presents to the Navi and why. But in any event, she brought what does he tell her to bring? He tells her to bring a present. One of the things he tells her to bring is something that is equivalent to shasisa, because Rashi over there says that it's called shasisa in the Gemara. That's what Kiveg is bringing down, or at least close to where that is. But if you look, there's another Rashi also in Shmuel. Rashi in Shmuel talks about Barzillai Giladi. He was one of the people that was a friend of David, at the end of David's life, in the beginning of Malachim Aleph, Parak Aleph. So David is telling Shlema about his last will and testament. So he says, "Go, you got to take revenge against Yair. You got to take revenge against Jim and Gera, but you got to be nice and do good to Barzillai, who was very nice to me." And Barzillai brought David a whole bunch of things. Rashi says that one of the things he brought him was this shesisa, but the word over there in the pasuk is he brought him koli. Koli. Where do we have koli? Parshas Emor. V'lechem v'koli v'charmel. If you look at Rashi in Chumash Parshas Emor, Rashi tells us what is kali. Rashi doesn't say it over here the way he says it, in terms of the idea that there's honey in it or anything like that. Now you have to go to more Erevin. But Rashi does say that it is this kind of barley that is parched, that is put into the oven when it's very young, and therefore it has its sweetness, and then they crush it and make it into this porridge. So one thing to just last note is that what it seems to be that this is the definition of what kali is in Chumash, because that's the way it's used in Shmuel. But in the pasuk in Malachim, the word there is mekudim. Rashi over there tells us that it's kali, which is Megillah de Gemara is shasisa. That's how we get to this idea. Anyhow, so this shasisa, we have a machlekes, what bracha you make on it. So shasisa, Rav Amashakal Niyabidvare, Ushmul Amaber Minei Mezainis. Machlekes Rav and Shmuel, do you make a shahakal or mezainis on it? Now remember, we have already had a number of times, right? That Rav and Shmuel, what do they say? Rav and Shmuel, Damar Tavra Kol Sheish B'Mechamish Saminin, whatever has in it from the five right types of grains is mavarchim labar minei mezainis. You always make a mezainis on. So how could it be a machlokes if they always say that you make a mezainis? Because obviously what we're saying is that it's not just a different form. It's a porridge. It's a question of what's ikr and tafel. It's like a whole variety of things over here. But let's not jump ahead of ourselves. So shasisa, Rav Amashakal Nebedvari, Shmuel Amar name is Zainis. So it's machlokes Rav and Shmuel. Amar Rav Chisda, v'loy pligi. Rav Chisda says they're not arguing Rav and Shmuel. Remember, Rav and Shmuel hold that whatever has milchamish saminin, you make it mezainis. So they're not arguing. What's the difference? And they're not even arguing over here either. What is it? They're talking about two different cases. What does it mean? Haba ava haba raka. One is talking about a thick kind of shasisa. One is talking about a thin one, a thicker porridge, or a thinner one. Says Rashi, ava lachila avida over milsa kaima. Right? It's considered sort of more of, I guess, koli if it has not been sort of watered down, and so therefore that would begin at mezainis. But baraka, if it's very thin, obviously it's been significantly watered down, and therefore that gets a shahako. Why does it get a shahako? Says the Gemara. Haba ava haba raka. The reason that you make a mezainis on the thick one is because that's being done for eating. But when you talk about the thin one, that's not for eating. That is for refuah. I'm not exactly sure what the refuahs were, but whatever it is, it was medicinal purposes, and therefore you make a shahakal. So therefore, says Rav Chisda, there's no machlokes between Rav and Shmuel. It really just depended on the kind of mixture that they were dealing with. If it was for eating, they make a mezainis. Called you make a mezainis. since the thin one is not for achila, but rather for refuah, so therefore you make a shahakal on it. And we're going to have to explain why that is in a few moments. Okay, continues the Gemara. Must Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef asked a question now on this explanation of Rav Chisda. Why? Because having a more Shabbos kufan vav shav and shabbos and it's a shatos b'Shabbos. You're allowed to mix the shatos, the shasita on Shabbos. The shaisim zaysim hamitzri, and you're allowed to drink the zaysim hamitzri, some sort of Egyptian beer. Look at Taisvis over here, v'shav and shabbos. Rabbi Rav Yosef, Tigmar there on Shabbos, or Rabbi and Rabbi Yosef, who are arguing on whether you could put in water into certain mixtures. So over there, right, different kind of a mixing. We're talking about a situation where you're able to be mixing in something that's a lighter type of a situation, like this is sisa. And why would somebody be mixing this? He would obviously be mixing this, you're saying, for refuah. That's what Rav is saying, why you make a shahako. So Rav Yosef is asking now, I don't understand. Says Rav Yosef, Rav Yosef if you're allowed to mix up this kind of shisisa, which is thinner, and it's done for medicinal purposes, then how could Rabbi and Rabbi Yosef agree that you're allowed to do that on the Sabbath? What do we know about Shabbos? What do we say about Shabbos? We already had the Gemara in Lamed Vav. What do we say on Shabbos? Shriga Samamanim, right? The Chacham Gazru on Refuah, and he cursed Mishim Shriga Samamanim. They're afraid of Teich, and they're afraid of situations where you would be obviously doing a malach on Shabbos. So therefore they said no medicine on Shabbos. I'm not getting into now practically what does that mean, and those fears still remain today. That's not the issue. The issue is that in the times of the Talmud, it was very clear that things that were done for refuah were not allowed to be done on Shabbos. So if, according to Rav Chisda is explaining, when you have this thinner mixture of this shasisa, it's only used for refuah, and that's what Rav said you give a shahako, then Rabbi Yosef is asking, how could Rabbi and Rabbi Yosef agree in Shabbos that you're allowed to mix the shasisa on Shabbos? Is this thin version of the shasisa on Shabbos, isn't it just for refuah? And therefore, it should be aser. That's the Gemara's question. Rabbi Yosef is asking. The most Rabbi Yosef is and the Shabbos b'Shabbos and Zeitzim HaMitzvah Sagadat Zechur Refuah Kol Mechaven. And if the whole purpose of this was just for refuah b'Shabbos Mishari, is refuah permitted on the Sabbath? This is the question. On this, the Gemara answers. Amalei Abaye. So Abaye says to his Rabbi, right? Abaye says to his Rabbi, Rabbi Yosef. Amalei Abaye, va'at loy tizbro. And what do you in fact hold? Do you not in fact agree with this? But Tanan Kala Eichlin, and we already learned the Mishnah tells us that Kala Eichlin Eichel Adam L'Refu b'Shabbos for Kala Mashkin Shaisa. You're allowed to eat any sort of Eichlin on Shabbos and any drink on Shabbos, even though it has some medicinal values. You don't say that you're not allowed to do this on Shabbos just because it has medicinal value. You're allowed to eat something or drink something that has medicinal value on Shabbos, says Rashi. What's the big deal? You're allowed to eat or drink something on Shabbos that has medicinal value if you have it on good order because you like to eat it or to drink it, and it also helps with refuah. Why not? What's the problem? So Rabbiya is now asking on Rabbi Yosef. You, Rabbi Yosef, are saying you're asking a kasha Rabbi Yosef on Rav Chisda. How could you have to explain Rav to say that the reason why you make a shahako is because it's for refuah, not for eating? So I don't understand. Rav Yosef asked a question that you see that you're allowed to mix the shasisa on Shabbos, the weak version of it, the thin version of it, which is for refuah. How could you do that if refuah on Shabbos is aser? So if it meaning from the way Rav Yosef is learning, it's obviously either not for refuah. Rav Chisda has it wrong, right? Even the weak version is for eating. In which case, why does Rav say shahako? Or come up with a different reason? But it can be that it's for refuah purposes and it's being allowed to be done on Shabbos. Says the Bible, what are you talking about? We have a Mishnah there in Shabbos that tells us you're allowed to eat or drink anything on Shabbos, even if it has medicinal value. It's not usher. The question is, what's your intent? The question is, what's the purpose of what it is? But it's not if there's an attendant value. If there's a value that's coming along with it, it's not a problem. So therefore, says Abaya to Rabbi Yosef, you got it wrong. How would you explain that? Why are you allowed to eat things that have medicinal value on Shabbos or drink things that have medicinal value? That's he has kavanah for the eating, and he has additional benefits for the refuah. What's the problem? No issue with that. Another version of it is the same idea. What are you going to say? The person has intent to eat. Is he also getting refuah? He's also having a intent for achila, and he's having a refuah memela. So what's the problem here? No issues. Rabbi Yosef, you are not correct, right? Rabbi is telling Rabbi Yosef that this cannot be correct, what you're saying. Your kasha doesn't start. Why? Because the shasisa that's being mixed, the thin version of the shasisa that's being mixed, is being utilized as food, and there's also additional medicinal value. So the Gemara then concludes. Let's just finish the Gemara. We need to have both of these dinim. The one that we know about what Rav is saying over here, that you make a shahakal on the thin version of the shasita, and the other din that we have about the fact that you're allowed to mix the shatus on Shabbos. Why? The Rav. We need this din of Rav. If I only knew the Gemara in Shabbos that you're allowed to mix the shasisa on Shabbos, I would think that the reason the person is making the weaker version of the shasisa is because of the fact that he has intent to eat it. And since he has intent to eat it, whatever refu he's getting out of it, it's only a memela, and therefore, since it's only getting a memela, it's allowed to be done on Shabbos, so no issues with it. But I wouldn't know that if somebody has intention to do it for refuah deliberately, over here, this situation where Rav is saying that you do make a shahaka. Why? Because if you intend specifically to do it for refuah, you're only going to make a shahaka. You're not going to make a mezainas. So I would think maybe you should make a bracha at all. Maybe you should make a bracha at all. Kamash Malan teaches me that since you have intention the intention here is for refuah, but there's also hana that's coming from it, and nevertheless still requires a bracha. Says Rashi. Even though with regards to Shabbos, we know that it's an eichel. And it's an eichel, you're allowed to mix, you're allowed to eat it on Shabbos, even though it has an attendant medicinal benefit. So I still need Shmuel. I still need Rav to look at the side that takes out the gears of Shmuel, because Shmuel is not really relevant to this point. It's really Rav. I still need Rav to teach me that you need a bracha. Why? Because of the fact that you are doing it for medicinal benefit. You're doing it for your medicine, but Shari Michael says Rashi boy brucha. Since it's a food, it still needs a bracha. All right, now let's look at the Taisus here. Taisus tells us, "V'isach atadach l'refuah abdi, refuah b'Shabbos mishari." Right? If you're doing it for refuah, is refuah on Shabbos permitted? And again, this is at the question point of the Gemara. You're not allowed to do refuah on Shabbos. Obviously, there's the medicinal attended benefit, but it's not fundamentally just for medicine. The servant came the kol she'ikra refuah ve'emer gilos ha'seisel tzarich achila as b'Shabbos. If you would just be doing it for refuah, that's the only reason that you're doing it, and it's not normal to do it then to eat it. Ve'emer gilos ha'seisel tzarich achila, it would not be normal to eat it on Shabbos. So then also to do it on Shabbos. Remember, we had before in the Gemara. We had on Lamed Hema base and Lamed Vav Manaf. We talked about that nigrain. Remember that nigrain? Remember that? We had that last week. That nigrain was this quote of Maya the Silka beet juice, right? And you were putting in the oil in the beet juice because you had cheshish b'grain. You had some sort of a throat ache. So the Gemara said over there on Lamed Vav that a cheshish b'grain, somebody who has a problem with his throat, lo yarenu b'shem tchila b'shams. He shouldn't be gargling with all this oil. Right? The question was, what bracha do you make on oil? The Gemara is trying to figure out what's the situation. If you're eating with bread, the bread's the ikr. If you what's the situation? If you're eating oil plain, it's mazik. You don't make a bracha. So the Gemara end up coming with the situation of the anigrain. The anigrain, what's the case? The case was the beet juice, which you're mixing in oil. So why would you be doing that? You're doing it because you're chesh b'grain. You have a throat ache, and this kind of oil would help it. I have no idea why, but let's make that assumption. So the halacha was hachesh b'grain lo yarenu b'Shabbos techila. You're not supposed to do that l'chatchila on Shabbos. Avol nois and shemen harbe. You put a lot of oil into this beet juice, and then you swallow. You swallow in your mouth. And Rashi told us you don't swallow necessarily with like straight. Rashi explained. You put it in your mouth to swallow it. And if it stays there for a while because you're gargling on the way down, that's not a problem. And that's why you're allowed to do that on Shabbos. It's not an issue of refuah. So Taisus is saying over here the same idea that a question is what is the ikr of what you're doing? If the ikr of what you're doing is for refuah and it's absolutely abnormal to do something like this on Shabbos, then it might be awesome. Over here, what we're saying with that nigrin is that it's not so, not obviously not so atypical. You're allowed to do it on Shabbos, but clearly it was being done for medicinal purposes. But you have to dress that down because of the problem of the isser of refuahs on Shabbos. So how do you dress it down? You put in this anigrin and your bailed. You actually swallow it. It's a machlokes. The Rashi says I'm not getting into that now, but you bailed it. But on your way down, before you swallow, you can gargle it, and then you're able to ma'ar. Next point, the bottom text is here. We have to hurry up. Right, the Mishnah told us that all of the eichlin you're allowed to eat on Shabbos, even if it has refuah benefits. Why? The mashmi did not call eichlin that feel kol sheikr lerefuah. Kevin sharoy la'achila shaper. The mashmayis is that even if the ikr is refuah, since it's roy for achila, it's okay. Be the naked kol masak agavor tzricha the Rav Shmuel the pshita the masis nesharia. Even if something is a main for refuah, it's not that you don't make a bracha at all. Why? Once you have hanafran, you need a bracha. But you shouldn't make a bracha mezayin. It's only shahakol. Because you're really not doing it to have a for the food. You're doing it for the value of it to take for the medicine. You're not doing it for suda, you're doing it for the drinking of this for the medicinal value. Says Tyson now a very fundamental point. Anything that comes from the chamesh taminin. It's not being done to fill yourself up. It's just really to drink. Like beer, and anything else that comes from the chamesh taminin. Mevarech shahako, you make a shahako on beer. Why? Because even though it's coming from the chamesh zaminin, since it's fundamentally not to be soed, it's a drink, so therefore it gets a shahako. Chiyagam the pasuk bahag, and this is what the bahag pasuk shasisa ava mevarech bar min mezainis on this thicker shasisa you make a mezainis. Kalishta on the weaker version of it, you make a shahako. Like Rav Chizda said, explaining Rav and Shmuel, even though the thin version is really for refuah, because you have some anof from it, you have to make a bracha. Look at Tesis Lamed Vav. Tesis Lamed Vav, we just had it the other day. I don't know if I had time to do it then, but look at the Tesis. It's the same thing. Given the second Tesis on top, given the Isla Anomi Neboy Bruche, if a person is drinking a drink, if the mashke is bad, the less Anomi Ne. If it has no hanaf from it, he's just drinking it for a full loy by bruche. If you're drinking, camphor syrup, whatever was the terrible cough syrup they used to take for your cough, you wouldn't have to make a brach on it. But pink medicine, pink medicine is also for kids terrible. But if there was theoretically a medicine that was really delicious, right, you actually had enjoyment from it. Says if you were able to have hanaf from it without the refuah, if you just enjoy the drink, you should make a bracha on it, even if you're taking it now for the medicine. That's basis. Yeah. I want to point out one other fascinating point, at least fascinating to me, is that Taisa says here, v'hilchasa shasisa ava, right? And Taisa says the words of chi agavna pasek bahag v'hilchasa shasisa etc. Taisa says this is how the bahag pasuk, and that's the v'hilchasa. Look at Rashi. V'hilchasa loy garsinon, and v'hilchas gedoylesu. Rashi says this hilchasa is not in our Gemara; it's from the halachas gedoyles. I want to just point out a fascinating thing. There's a in the Mishnah's Kalayim, there's a Mishnah of the Rambam that's a very complicated one. It's controversial what he says. I'm not getting into it now. Don't have any time. Just to point out one thing. The Gemara had said a lashon, and the Gemara's lashon was v'hilchasa kimar zutra, v'dafikni rabbana rachmana b'chad lishna. And the Rambam's lashon, at least in one of the versions that we have of the Perusha Mishnah, is that the Rambam says V'hamaymer anisker. This v'hilchos l'kemar sutra. And v'hamaymer anisker b'gemara neither. Eina divrei Talmud. Ella pirish. This is not from the Talmud. It's just a pirish. If you look there in the Melech Shlomo in Kalayim, the Melech Shlomo says the Chasav and look at there. The first Yisrael says that there's a lot of controversies in this Rambam. Without getting into that, so the Rambam says the Melech Shlomo says the lashon about the Rambam. The Chasav Rambam perish Mishnah the Enim lashon Gemara. This Hilchos L'Kemar Zutra is not from the Gemara. Ela Psak Mishum Goyin. It's a Psak from the Goyinim, meaning the Bahag. V'chein Matzinu Maseches Brachos. So too we find the Maseches Brachos. Kama v'Hilchos the Paraketz and Mevarchin. Again and again and again we find the Maseches Brachos, the Paraketz and Mevarchin Hilchos. The Eina Me'ikar and Eschos. It's not from the Ikar and Eschos of the Shas. It is from the Bahag. Nevertheless, many of the Rishonim and Acharonim have this in their Girsa. Right. So for our purposes now, we have the Melech Shlomo who's telling us about the Hilchos and the Paraketz and Mevarchin, and we should know that they're probably later additions. The Rashi here tells us he's not going to put it in the Gemara. Why? Because it's from the Bahag. It says we're going to quote the Hilchos from the Bahag. That's the halacha. Fine. Continues the Gemara. We have one more delicious little Gemara here, very quick. It says the Mishnah. What bracha do you make? What bracha do you make on bread? Do you make hamaitzi or maitzi? It's the right difference of a hey. Do you make hamaitzi or maitzi? What's the difference? Hamaitzi is mashma that somebody is bringing out the bread, and maitzi is mashma they already brought out the bread. So the question is, what is the correct tense? Everybody agrees when we say maitzi lechem menarz that Hashem already brought out the bread. That will be correct tense and it will be correct usage because the bread's already here, as Rashi points out. Everybody agrees the afik mashma shahoitzi kvar, it's already been brought out. Here's the bread in front of you. That's the correct bracha. You need a bracha that will be in the past. You're coming to eat the bread right now. What's the proof that maitzi is in the past? Right by Bilam's bracha to the Jewish people. Hashem brought them out of Egypt. As Rashi points out, as Kishanem, Parshas Bilam, they're already out of Egypt. The machlokes is by how the word hamaitzi. The Rabbanan say hamaitzi the avik mashma. The Rabbanan say that hamaitzi is also mashma that it was in the past. The pasuk tells us there in Devarim that Hashem brought out water for you from the rock, and He already brought out the water. Right? We already had the water from the rock earlier, right? The whole Ma'aser we have it in the last week's parsha. Hashem brought out water from the rock. That's not the issue. That it was in the future, and now it was already in the past. Rabbi Nechemi says Hamaitzi the Mavik Mashma. No, Rabbi Nechemi says Hamaitzi is Mashma in the future. Shenemar Hamaitzi Eschem Mitachas Sivuos Mitzrayim. Look at the pasuk beginning of Eira. Hashem says, "I'm going to bring you out of Egypt from the burdens of Egypt." Rabbi Nechemi says Rashi the Mavik Mashma. She'osi Loitzi the Siv Hamaitzi Eschem. Ushenemar pasuk Zeh Lamoshe Dayin Leyotzah. At that point, they hadn't yet left. It's the beginning of Parshas Eira. Hamaitzi L'Chamayim and the pasuk Hamaitzi L'Chamayim. What did Rabbi Nechemi say about that? Adayin Hamaitzi Kol Yimei Hayesim Minbar. Says Reb Nechemia, even Hamaitzi L'Chamayim Tzorach is still happening. So long as they were in the desert, they're still getting rocks, giving forth water. So this for him. That's still in the future. The Rabbanan Hahuk Hachi Karmar Lukucha Brichel Yisrael. No, the rabbis explain this. Is how you have to understand the pasuk in Parshas Ve'er. Kad Mefikna L'Chu Avin L'Chu Milsa Ki Hechad Yadisu Da'anohu Da'afkidas Yaschem Mitzrayim. You have to look at the pasuk differently, says the rabbis. The rabbis say, this is what Hashem is telling the Jewish people. When I'm going to take you out of Egypt, I'm going to do things for you, that you will know that you will know that I had brought you out of Egypt. Meaning it's talking about what's going to happen in the future, you will know about the past. Even that pasuk isn't. Look at the actual pasuk. You will know then that I was Hashem who brought you out. So it's still talking about the past. So again, according to Rabbanan, Hamaitzi works. It says the Rabbanan as by Rav Zvid, Achud Rav Shmuel Bar Zvid. The rabbis were praising to Rav Zera, this son of Rav Zvid, a brother of Shmuel from Rav Zvid, the Adam Gadol Baki B'Brachos. So that he was a great Adam Gadol and he was a Baki in Brachos. When he comes in, bring him to me. I want to meet him also. So when they brought him, he brought him out a piece of bread. What do you mean? He brought out a piece of bread. He wants to see what he's going to do. He's testing him. If ever you happen to come upon rabbis, or if you ever become a rabbi, you'll know you're a rabbi because this is one of the big games. The rabbis play with each other. They always have a fruit platter, and the fruit platter is to test the rabbi who's coming to visit. No, what is he going to make bracha on first? It's always there. It's mamish. It's a great game, and they always have a discussion about it. It's part of the whole game. Anyhow, so the same thing happened over here. He came in to visit this son of Rav Zvid. So Rava brings him Rav Zvid brings him out a piece of bread. So Pasuk Mighty, and he says Mighty. This is the guy who told me such a big kanaker. He's an expert in brachos. If we turn to page 11, if he said then I would know the reason. Ashmin in time, I would know the reason. Says Rashi, Pirush of the Crow. I would know the explanation of the pasuk, right? Ashmin in time, particularly about Gemara in Pesach and Kuf Test. We have discussed that in Sunday classes about the Sisrei Torah or time of the Crow. This is the reasons of the psukim. And if you said the word hamaitzi, I would know that he's giving me the reasons, explaining me the psukim, and he was telling me that the halacha is like the rabbanon. That's he's telling me something kanakarish. El damar maitzi, my kamashmalam. What's he teaching me if he's telling me maitzi? He's just doing it in order. Why did the son of Rav Zvid do it? He did it in order to avoid machlokes. Halacha is that you do say, and this halacha we do have. You say hamaitzi, not maitzi. The kamlach rabbanon, the amri da'afik mashma, that we hold like the rabbanon who hold that it is afik, that is bringing, that it means that it is brought forth. Fascinatingly, Tyson says from the Rishalmi that what's the reason we were afraid of saying maitzi? Another reason, because kigain, the bracha that we say, hamaitzi. If we say maitzi is melech ha'olam maitzi, you could make a mistake and make the mems squinch. The same way we had in the Gemara before about the different things about Shema. You have to make sure that the words that are the ending letter and the beginning letter are the same. You have to separate. So that's what the Rishalmi says about why you don't want to say maitzi. Ha'olam maitzi, you would have a problem. Correct, Taisus. Well, what about the maitzi lechem min haaretz? Lechem and min also is a problem, right? Lechem min is the two mems. It's also scrunched. No, that one we can't say and do anything with, because the pasuk tells us right? It comes mamash from the pasuk. So that one's for sure talking about the future. Hashem brings out food for the animals and for the humans. But you see, mamash the source of the way the bracha reads that we have. And Pesach then points out what we do today. A person, when he makes hamaiti, should hold the bread with his 10 fingers to remind us of the 10 words in that pasuk, which reminds us then of why we're making the bracha of hamaiti, of the fact that we have to make it with each word perfect. Have a wonderful day.